Grace, I just saw your obituary in the paper. Please tell me it's a mistake. I stood frozen in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, my coffee going cold on the counter. I'm sorry. What did you just say? It says your funeral is this Saturday. A pause. Grace, are you okay? You sound strange. If your family would rather bury the truth than face it, stay with me. This is family betrayal verdict. I'm fine, I said, my voice not sounding like mine at all. I need to call you back. I hung up before she could answer. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone twice trying to open the browser. I typed my own name into the search bar. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. The obituary loaded before I was ready for it. Grace Elaine Whitmore, 34, passed peacefully after a long illness, surrounded by loving family. Services to be held Saturday, at Cedar Hollow Chapel. I read it 4 times, waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. They didn't. I wasn't sick. I wasn't dying. I was standing in my kitchen in Ohio, very much alive, staring at my own death notice like it belonged to a stranger, who happened to share my name. My throat closed up so tight I had to sit down on the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinet, the tile cold through my jeans. I called my mother. It rang 4 times before she picked up. Mom? There's an obituary. With my name on it. Silence stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Grace, she finally said, her voice careful, rehearsed. We need to talk about this calmly. Calmly? You told people I was dead. We had to tell people something. Those 5 words landed harder than anything else she could have said. Not it was a mistake. Not someone made an error. We had to tell people something, like my life was a loose thread that needed tying off before it embarrassed the family fabric. You could have told them the truth, I said. That I moved. That I needed space. Anything except this. You disappeared for 8 months, Grace. What were we supposed to say? I wasn't hiding. I told you I was in treatment. I told you where I was. You told some people, she said, and there was an edge in it now, something defensive dressing itself up as reason. It got complicated. It was easier this way. Easier. My whole existence, folded into a word meant for traffic routes and recipe substitutions. Who else knows? I asked. Who's coming to this funeral? Everyone, Grace. The whole family. Some of your father's old colleagues. It's Saturday. I closed my eyes. 3 days. They'd built an entire ceremony around my absence, and it was happening in 3 days, whether I existed or not. I want you to cancel it. I can't cancel it now. The chapel's booked. People have flights. I'm alive, Mom. That should outweigh a chapel booking. She didn't answer right away, and in that silence I heard something I wasn't prepared for, not panic, not grief, but calculation. The particular quiet of someone doing math in their head. We'll talk after the service, she said finally. It's already set in motion. She hung up before I could respond. I sat on that kitchen floor for a long time, the phone warm and useless in my palm, my own obituary still glowing faintly on the screen where I'd left the browser open. Set in motion. Not a mistake to fix. A plan already running, and somehow I was the complication in it, not the reason for it. My hands finally stopped shaking enough to do something useful. I took a screenshot of the obituary before it could disappear or change, saving it to 3 different places the way I'd learned to save anything that mattered after a childhood of things quietly vanishing from family retellings. My phone buzzed. A text from my cousin, Emily. Just saw the notice. I'm so sorry. Wish I'd known you were sick. I stared at those words, feeling something crack open in my chest that had nothing to do with anger yet. Just disbelief, wide and hollow. I'm not sick, Em. I'm not dead. This is a mistake, or a lie. I don't know which yet. 3 dots appeared, then vanished. Then, after a long minute. Wait, what? Your mom told everyone you passed away in your sleep. She said it was peaceful. She lied to you. Why would she lie about something like that? I didn't have an answer yet. I only had the shape of a question forming underneath everything. A question about money, about my father's estate, about the small trust my grandmother had left specifically to me before she died, one my mother had always resented, always mentioned at holidays with a tight smile and a comment about fairness. I hadn't thought about that trust in over a year. I thought about it now. I called my brother, Daniel, next. He answered on the first ring, his voice too bright, too rehearsed, the same practiced calm I'd heard in our mother. Grace? Hey. How are you holding up? How am I holding up? Daniel, I'm not dead. I know that, he said, too quickly. It's been a weird week. Mom said it would be easier to handle things this way. Simplify the paperwork situation. What paperwork? The trust. Grandma's trust. There were some complications with the transfer since you'd been unreachable so long. Mom said if we just process things, as if the estate had settled, it would save everyone months of legal mess. The floor seemed to tilt slightly under me. You're telling me she declared me dead to access Grandma's trust faster? It's not, he stopped. It's not exactly like that. Then what is it exactly like, Daniel? He didn't answer. The silence told me everything his words wouldn't. I need you to send me anything you have about this, I said. Emails. Documents. Anything with dates on it. I don't know if I should. Daniel. I am asking you to prove to me that my own death wasn't a business decision. Another long pause and then, quieter, I'll see what I have. It wasn't a yes. But it wasn't a no, either, the first crack in a wall I hadn't realized my whole family had built around me. I hung up and sat in the settling dark of my kitchen, the obituary still glowing on my laptop screen, my coffee fully cold now, forgotten on the counter where I'd left it in another life, 20 minutes, and one entire identity ago. 3 days. A chapel full of people who believed I was gone. A trust that apparently couldn't wait for me to be found. I opened my email and started forwarding every message I could find, old birthday wishes from my mother, texts confirming my location during treatment, anything that proved I had never been missing, only unreachable by choice, recovering exactly where I said I'd be. If they wanted a version of me that was safely, conveniently dead, they were going to have to explain, in front of everyone, exactly why that version had been so much more useful to them alive. By morning, the family group chat had gone silent in a way that told me more than words could have. I still had access, barely. My phone buzzed once, twice, and then I watched, in real time, as my name disappeared from the thread. Grace Whitmore has been removed. I sat staring at that notification for a long moment, my chest tight, my breath shallow in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. I called Emily. She picked up sounding rattled, like she'd been crying or arguing, maybe both. They took you out of the group chat, she said before I could speak. I saw it happen. Nobody said anything, they just did it. Who's they, Emily? Your mom. Maybe your brother, too, I don't know who has admin rights. She exhaled hard. I asked what was going on and your mom said it was too confusing to keep explaining to people. Like you're a scheduling conflict. I'm her daughter. I know. I'm sorry. I don't understand any of this. I didn't either, not fully, not yet. But pieces were assembling themselves into a shape I didn't like. That afternoon, I drove to my mother's house, my hands tight on the wheel the whole way, rehearsing words I knew wouldn't matter once I was standing in front of her. She opened the door and didn't look surprised to see me. That was the first thing that unsettled me, no shock, no relief, just the flat, composed expression of someone who'd already planned for this conversation. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Not before Saturday. I shouldn't be dead, either, but here we are." She stepped back to let me in, glancing over my shoulder like she was checking whether anyone had seen me arrive. "You disappeared for 8 months, Grace," she said, settling into the same defense she'd used on the phone, only now with more edge. "You went to treatment without telling half this family where you'd gone. What was I supposed to think, that you'd just walk back in whenever it suited you? You knew exactly where I was. I texted you every week. You texted me. Not your aunts. Not your cousins. Not your father's side of the family, who kept asking where you'd gone. So the answer was to tell them I died. The answer was to simplify a very complicated situation," she said, her voice climbing, "that you created by vanishing in the first place." There it was, the twist, the quiet rewriting of history where my recovery became abandonment, where my silence became a wound she had every right to bandage however she saw fit. "I have every message I ever sent you," I said. "Every one. I can prove I told you where I was." "This isn't about proof, Grace. It's about how it looked." "How it looked to who?" "The people who now think I'm in the ground." She didn't answer that. Her silence had a shape I was starting to recognize, not innocence, but calculation, weighing how much to admit and how much to still control. "I heard about Grandma's trust," I said, watching her face carefully. "I heard you needed the paperwork simplified." Something flickered behind her eyes, gone almost as fast as it appeared. "That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" "It's complicated, legally. The trust required proof of status before certain conditions released." "Status," I repeated. "You mean whether I was alive or dead?" "I mean the language was vague, and the lawyer said processing would move faster if the estate treated the beneficiary situation as settled." "You had me declared dead to move money faster." "I never used the word dead with the lawyer," she said, too quickly, too carefully worded to be anything but rehearsed. "There were administrative steps taken. I didn't control every detail." It was the first crack in her composure, not an admission, but an evasion sharp enough to prove there was something worth evading. That evening, my father called. I hadn't expected to hear from him at all. He'd always let my mother run point on anything that required confrontation. "Your mother's under a lot of stress," he said, his voice tired in a way that made me want to believe him, briefly, before I remembered how many times that tiredness had excused things before. "The trust has been a headache for months. She just wanted it resolved by telling everyone I was dead. She didn't mean for it to go that far. I think it just snowballed." "Snowballed," I repeated. "Dad, there's a chapel booked. An obituary in the paper. People flying in. That's not a snowball. That's a plan." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know everything that happened, Grace. I've been staying out of it." "You're staying out of my own funeral." He didn't answer that either, and something in his silence told me he was still deciding which side of this he wanted to be found standing on. I hung up and sat in my car outside my mother's house for a long time, the porch light flicking on behind me as the evening settled in, the smell of someone's neighboring fireplace drifting faint and wood smoke sweet through the cracked window. My private memory arrived uninvited, the way it always did, my grandmother's hands, weathered and warm, pressing an envelope into mine the last time I saw her. "This is yours, Grace girl. No matter what anyone says, this is yours." I hadn't understood, then, what she'd been warning me about. I understood now. I opened my banking app on instinct, checking the account tied loosely to the trust, the one I rarely looked at because it had always been more promise than reality, tied up in legal language I'd never bothered to fully parse. A notification waited for me. Recent activity. An inquiry, made 2 days ago, requesting documentation to release funds under a deceased beneficiary clause. My stomach dropped through the floor of the car. They weren't just simplifying paperwork. They were actively trying to pull the trigger on my death before the funeral had even happened. I took a screenshot, my hands steadier now than they had any right to be, and saved it beside the obituary in a folder I'd started calling, without irony, proof of life. My phone buzzed. Daniel. I found some emails, he said, his voice low, like he was hiding somewhere in the house to make the call. Between Mom and the estate lawyer. I don't think I was supposed to see them. Send them to me. If I do this, Grace, there's no taking it back. She'll know it was me. She already erased me from a group chat and a bank record, Daniel. I think we are past the point of soft landings. A long pause. Then, give me an hour. I sat in the dark car, waiting, the street light above me flickering once, then steadying, casting a thin orange glow across the dashboard. My hands had finally gone still. Whatever was in those emails, I had a feeling it would answer the question I hadn't wanted to ask yet, not whether my mother had done this out of grief-adjacent confusion, but how long she'd been planning it before I ever found out I was already gone. The emails arrived at 11:47 that night, 7 of them, forwarded from Daniel with no message attached, just the subject line still intact, Whitmore Trust, beneficiary status. I read them alone at my kitchen table, the same table where this had all started less than 48 hours earlier. The oldest one was dated 5 months ago. 5 months, long before the obituary, long before the chapel was booked, long before I had any idea any of this was happening. Mrs. Whitmore, per our conversation, if beneficiary remains unreachable past the standard notice period, the estate may petition for presumption of death to expedite distribution. This requires formal filing and a waiting period, but given the circumstances you've described, it may be the most efficient path. My mother's reply, 2 days later, how long is the waiting period? I'd like to move as quickly as possible. I sat very still, the kitchen quiet around me, the refrigerator humming its low constant note, the only sound in a room that suddenly felt too large. She hadn't stumbled into this because I'd gone silent for 8 months. She'd been asking about expediting my death 5 months ago, while I was still texting her every single week from treatment. My hands trembled as I scrolled further. An email from 3 months back, the lawyer again, given the beneficiary's last known contact was recent, presumption of death may not apply cleanly. Alternative approach. Formal obituary and memorial service can sometimes satisfy administrative requirements for certain fund releases, particularly if framed as the family's chosen method of closure. There it was. Not a legal necessity. A suggestion. A shortcut, dressed up in careful language, and my mother had taken it. I forwarded all 7 emails to my own account, then printed them, then photographed each page with my phone for good measure. I wasn't taking any chances with proof that could vanish as easily as I apparently had. My phone buzzed near midnight. An unknown number. Whatever Daniel showed you, it's not the whole picture. You'll regret pushing this further. Some doors are better left closed, your mother. I read it twice, the chill of it settling somewhere behind my ribs. She'd never signed a text to me before. The signature felt less like identification, and more like a warning wearing a name tag. I didn't respond. I screenshot it instead, adding it to the folder that was growing heavier by the hour. I barely slept that night. I lay awake replaying my grandmother's voice, the last real conversation we'd had, months before she passed. Your mother's never been good with waiting for things she thinks she deserves, Grace girl. Watch yourself. I hadn't understood the warning then. I understood it with painful clarity now. In the morning, I drove to my bank, not the one tied to the trust, but my own personal branch, and asked to speak with someone about verifying my identity for their records, a formal, dated, notarized confirmation that Grace Elaine Whitmore was, as of that Thursday morning, very much alive. The banker looked at me a little strangely when I explained why, but she processed it anyway, stamping and signing a document I tucked carefully into my bag like it was worth more than anything else I owned. It was, in a way. It was the first piece of paper in this entire nightmare that said, officially, undeniably, I exist. I called Frank, not an uncle this time, but my grandmother's old attorney, the one who'd handled the original trust paperwork before my mother's lawyer got involved. He remembered me instantly. Grace? I heard the strangest thing, he said carefully. Something about an obituary. It's true. I need your help. I still have the original trust documents, he said. Your grandmother was very specific about the terms. If anyone tried to move funds outside of those terms while you're alive and reachable, that's not just unethical. That could be fraud. The word landed heavier than I expected. Fraud. Not a family disagreement. Not an overreaction to my silence. A crime, with a name, with consequences. Can you send me the original document? I asked. The one with the actual terms, not whatever's been filed since. I can do better than that, he said. I can meet you and walk you through exactly what your grandmother intended, in writing, dated the day she signed it. We met that afternoon in his cramped, paper-stacked office. The smell of old ink and older wood a strange comfort after 2 days of digital chaos. He slid the original trust across the desk, my grandmother's careful signature at the bottom, still crisp despite the years. She was very clear, Frank said, tapping the relevant clause. Funds only released to you directly, upon your verified request. No presumption clause. No alternate distribution unless you're confirmed deceased through legal, verified means, not a family decision, not an obituary. I sat with that for a moment, my throat tight, my eyes stinging in a way I hadn't let myself feel yet through all of this. My grandmother had protected me before she was even gone, anticipating a version of this exact situation, as if she'd known, somehow, what my mother might be capable of when patience ran out. There's something else, Frank said, his voice careful now. I got a call last week from an attorney I didn't recognize, asking about the process for challenging a trust like this if the original terms were inconvenient. My mother's lawyer. I assume so. I didn't give them anything. But it tells me they were already looking for ways around your grandmother's terms before any of this became public. Another layer, peeled back. Not confusion. Not panic. A calculated search for loopholes, weeks before an obituary had ever run. I left his office with certified copies of everything, the original trust, my identity confirmation, a written statement from Frank himself outlining the actual legal terms. 3 more pieces of proof, 3 more anchors in a story someone had tried very hard to rewrite without me in it. That evening, my phone buzzed. Emily again, her voice hesitant when I picked up. I think Aunt Carol is starting to ask questions, she said. She heard from someone that you'd called Emily, alive. She wants to know what's actually going on before Saturday. Will you tell her the truth if she asks you directly? A pause, longer than I wanted. I don't want to make things worse. Emily, they are already as bad as they can get. I was declared dead for a trust fund. I know. I've never gone against your mom before. You don't have to go against her. Just don't help her keep lying. Another pause, softer this time. Okay. If she asks, I won't lie for her. It wasn't a full alliance. But it was the first real crack in the wall of practiced denial everyone around me had been maintaining, and I let myself feel a small, cautious relief at that. If you've ever had to build your own case just to prove you belong in your own life, you understand why receipts matter more than anyone's word. Stay close, because what came next changed everything. That night, I laid out everything on my kitchen table: the emails, the trust documents, the identity confirmation, the threatening text, and photographed the whole spread, a visual record in case anything ever disappeared the way I apparently already had once on paper. 2 days until the funeral. 2 days until a chapel full of people, who believed I was gone, would sit through a service built on a lie convenient enough to be worth telling. I thought about staying away. Letting the lawyers handle it quietly, letting the fraud unravel through paperwork instead of confrontation. But some things can't be undone with paperwork alone. Some things need a room full of witnesses to understand exactly what almost happened, and exactly who was willing to let it. I picked up my phone and texted Frank one final question: if I show up Saturday, in person, is there anything legally I need to be careful about? His reply came within minutes. Just bring the documents. The truth doesn't need much help once it's standing in the room. The morning after my meeting with Frank, my mother called me directly for the first time since I'd shown up unannounced at her door. Her voice had changed. Gone was the sharp defensiveness from 2 nights before. In its place was something softer, more careful, a tone I recognized instantly because I'd heard her use it before, on relatives she needed something from. Grace, honey. I've been thinking about this all wrong, letting things get so tense between us. Is that an apology? It's me wanting to fix this, she said. I only ever wanted what's best for this family. You have to believe that. Then why did you try to release Grandma's trust while I was still texting you every week? The pause on her end lasted just a bit too long. There were financial pressures you don't know about. Your father's business hit a rough patch. I panicked. I thought I was protecting everyone. By declaring me dead. By trying to keep this family from falling apart, she said, her voice catching in a way that might have been genuine or might have been rehearsed. I genuinely couldn't tell anymore. And that uncertainty scared me more than her anger had. I found the emails, Mom. 5 months ago. Before any of this financial pressure you're describing now. Silence. Longer this time. I don't remember the exact timeline, she said finally, too carefully. There are things you don't understand about running a household, holding a family together. Then explain them to me. Clearly. Right now. She didn't. She pivoted instead, the way she always had whenever a direct question got too close to something she didn't want to answer. Come to the service Saturday, she said. Quietly. We can talk after, privately, and figure out how to explain this to everyone without it becoming a spectacle. You want me to sit through my own funeral silently, so you can control how people find out I'm alive. I want to protect you from the fallout, Grace. People will ask questions. It could get messy. It's already messy. You made it messy the day you filed paperwork calling me deceased. Her voice hardened again, the softness evaporating as quickly as it had arrived. You don't understand what it's been like carrying this family financially while you were off finding yourself in some treatment center. There it was. The mask, slipping for just a moment, revealing the resentment underneath the performance of concern. I was healing, I said quietly. Not disappearing. It felt the same from where I was standing. I hung up without responding to that. Some sentences didn't deserve a rebuttal. They only deserved to be recorded, remembered, added to the pile of evidence proving exactly who I was dealing with. That afternoon, a certified envelope arrived at my apartment, forwarded from my old address by a neighbor kind enough to track me down. Inside was a copy of a life insurance policy I didn't recognize, my name listed as the insured, my mother listed as the primary beneficiary, filed and dated 4 months earlier. My hands went cold around the paper. I hadn't authorized any insurance policy. I hadn't even known one existed. I called Frank immediately, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "There's a life insurance policy," I said. "In my name. Filed months ago. I never signed anything." "Send it to me," he said, his tone sharpening into something focused and serious. "If your signature's on that application and it's not actually yours, that's forgery on top of everything else." I photographed every page and sent them within minutes, my chest tight, with a kind of fear I hadn't let myself feel yet through all of this, not fear of being erased anymore, but fear of how far someone was willing to go to erase me profitably. Frank called back within the hour. "The signature's inconsistent with samples I have of yours from the original trust paperwork," he said carefully. "I'm not an expert, but it's worth having examined. This changes things, Grace. Significantly." My private memory surfaced without warning, my grandmother's hand guiding mine, as she taught me to sign my full name properly for the first time, insisting I practice it slow and deliberate. "Your signature is yours alone, Grace girl. Don't ever let anyone else hold the pen for you." I sat with that memory longer than I meant to, my throat tight, the weight of the certified envelope heavier in my hands than paper had any right to be. The vulnerability passed, the way it always did now, replaced by something steadier and colder. I texted Emily, my fingers steady despite everything churning underneath. "Has your mom mentioned anything about a life insurance policy on me?" Her response came fast. "Aunt Carol mentioned something at dinner last week. Said your mom took one out, just in case, after you went to treatment." I didn't think much of it at the time. "Just in case of what, exactly?" A long pause. "I don't know. I didn't ask. I should have asked." That evening, I drove to the boutique near my apartment, where I'd once bought a black dress for another relative's funeral years earlier, still hanging in the back of my closet, tag still attached, never worn. I hadn't planned to need it for this. I asked about last-minute alterations, just in case the fit had changed. The tailor promised it ready by Friday evening. "Special occasion?" she asked, pinning the hem. "You could say that," I said. "I'm attending my own funeral." She laughed, assuming I was joking. I let her believe that. Some truths were easier carried alone until the moment they needed to be spoken aloud, in a room full of people who'd already decided they knew how my story ended. Frank called one more time that night, his voice careful in the way of someone about to hand over something heavier than he wanted to. "I made a call to a contact at the insurance company," he said. "Off the record, they confirmed the policy was flagged internally last week for irregular documentation. They were already reviewing it before you ever contacted me. So they suspected fraud before I did. It looks that way. If this goes forward as an investigation, it won't just be a family matter anymore, Grace. It'll be a legal one, with real consequences." I sat with that for a long moment, watching the streetlights flicker on outside my window one by one, the neighborhood settling into evening the way it always did, indifferent to the fact that somewhere inside my apartment, an entire fraudulent version of my death was slowly, methodically coming undone. "Good," I finally said. "She built this on the assumption I'd never find out. I want her to understand exactly how wrong that assumption was." Frank was quiet for a moment. "Are you still planning to go Saturday?" "More than ever," I said. She wanted a controlled explanation, delivered quietly, on her terms. "I think the room deserves the Real one instead." Friday morning, I met with Frank one final time before the service, laying every document across his desk in the order they'd surface if this became a legal case: the emails, the trust terms, the insurance policy, my identity confirmation, my mother's threatening text. "There's one more thing," he said, sliding a folder toward me I hadn't seen before. I tracked down the witness who notarized the insurance application. My pulse quickened. And? She's willing to talk. Reluctantly. Says a woman came in claiming to be you, presented ID, signed the documents. She noticed some inconsistencies, but didn't think much of it at the time. Someone impersonated me. That's what it looks like. I have her number. She agreed to a call if you want to hear it directly. I called from Frank's office, my hand steady despite the raw building quietly under my ribs. The notary, a woman named Patricia, answered cautiously. I don't want any trouble, she said before I'd even finished introducing myself. I just process paperwork. I'm not responsible for what people bring me. I understand. I just need to know what you remember. A woman came in with an ID. Said she was in a hurry, nervous, kept checking her phone. I should have looked closer at the photo, honestly. I've thought about it since, the resemblance was close, but not exact. Would you recognize her again? A pause, heavier this time. I might. But I don't want to get pulled into a family dispute. I have my own job to think about. This isn't a family dispute anymore, I said quietly. It's fraud. The silence stretched long enough that I thought she might hang up. If it comes to that, she finally said, I'll tell the truth about what I remember. But I'm not volunteering unless someone official asks. It wasn't the full confirmation I wanted, but it was enough. A witness who existed, who remembered inconsistencies, who would speak if pressed by the right authority. That afternoon, I drove to my father's office, unannounced, the way I'd once shown up at my mother's front door. He looked up from his desk, startled, then quickly composed. Grace? I wasn't expecting you. I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to actually answer this time. He set down his pen. Okay. Did you know about the insurance policy? The one filed in my name, without my signature. His jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away, which told me most of what I needed before he said a word. I saw paperwork, he finally admitted. I didn't ask enough questions. I told myself it was estate planning, something routine. You knew someone was impersonating me to file it. I didn't know that part, he said, his voice dropping. I swear, Grace, I didn't know it went that far. But you suspected something was wrong. He looked down at his desk, his hands flat against the wood the same way mine had once pressed flat against a steering wheel. I suspected. I didn't want to know for certain. It was easier not to ask. Easier for who? He didn't answer that either. The question hung in the office, unresolved, another small crack widening in a foundation that had never been as stable as I'd once believed. Will you tell the truth Saturday, if it comes to that? I asked. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes finally meeting mine. Yes. I should have asked the hard questions a long time ago. I'm done not asking them. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, not for either of us. But it was the first time my father had chosen a side out loud, and something in my chest loosened slightly at the sound of it. I left his office and sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine, my hands cold against the wheel despite the warm afternoon air pressing through the cracked window. My phone buzzed. My mother. I heard you went to see your father, she said, no preamble, her voice sharp and immediate. I did. You're trying to turn this whole family against me. You did that yourself, months ago, when you decided a fraudulent insurance policy was worth more than telling the truth. You have no idea what kind of pressure I've been under, she snapped, her composure fully gone now, the mask discarded entirely. The business is failing. Your father won't admit it. Someone had to do something. So you stole my identity. I did what I had to do to survive in this family, she said, her voice cracking on the last word, something raw and unguarded slipping through for the first time since this began. You have no idea what it's like, watching everything you built fall apart, and being the only one willing to fix it. You didn't fix anything, I said quietly. You just built a bigger lie on top of the first one. She was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had gone cold, all pretense of vulnerability sealed back away. Don't come Saturday, Grace. For your own sake. I'll be there, I said. You built a room full of witnesses to my death. I think they deserve to see me walk back into it. I hung up before she could respond, my hands finally steady, my breath even despite everything churning underneath. That evening, Emily called, her voice quieter than I'd heard it all week. Aunt Carol confronted your mom today, she said. Asked her directly about the insurance policy. I was in the room. What did she say? She didn't really answer. Just got defensive, said everyone was ganging up on her. But Grace, Aunt Carol believes you now. Completely. She's not defending your mom anymore. Another crack, another shift, the room slowly rearranging itself around a truth it could no longer ignore. Will you both be there tomorrow? I asked. Yes, Emily said. Whatever happens. I'm not standing on the sidelines anymore. I thanked her and sat alone in my apartment afterward, the black dress hanging freshly altered on my closet door, the folder of evidence squared neatly on my kitchen table, every document in order, every name spelled correctly, every date verified. Tomorrow, a chapel full of people would gather to mourn a version of me that had never actually existed, built on paperwork forged in my name, and a mother desperate enough to let a lie become the easiest solution to a problem money alone couldn't fix. I thought about my grandmother's hand guiding mine across a signature line, insisting I never let anyone else hold the pen for me. Tomorrow, I intended to make sure no one ever tried again. Saturday morning arrived heavy with fog, the kind that softened every edge of the world outside my window and made the day feel unreal before it had even properly started. I dressed slowly, deliberately, the black dress settling against me like something borrowed from a life I hadn't actually lived. In my bag, I packed the folder, emails, trust documents, the insurance policy, my identity confirmation, everything laid out in careful order, tabbed and labeled the way Frank had shown me. Frank called as I was locking my apartment door. I spoke with Patricia again last night, he said. The notary. She's agreed to come today, quietly, if needed. Said she couldn't stop thinking about it after our call. Is she willing to speak, if it comes to it? She said she'll confirm what she remembers, if directly asked, in front of witnesses. That's more than we had yesterday. It was one more piece locking into place, one more voice that could stand alongside mine instead of against it. There's something else, Frank added, his voice more careful now. I did some digging into your father's business finances, the ones your mother mentioned. It's worse than a rough patch, Grace. He's been quietly bankrupt for almost a year. Your mother's known for months. The full shape of it clicked into place, cold and complete. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't grief. It wasn't even really about protecting the family, not in any way that mattered. It was survival, dressed up as sentiment, a woman watching her family's finances collapse, deciding the fastest fix was a dead daughter's trust fund and an insurance policy nobody had agreed to. Will you testify to that, if it comes to it? I asked. If it's relevant and asked of me properly, yes, Frank said. But Grace, today isn't about a courtroom. Today's about you walking into that room and letting people see the truth for themselves. The legal consequences can follow after. I drove to Cedar Hollow Chapel with the fog still clinging low to the road, my hand steady on the wheel in a way that would have felt impossible 3 days earlier. The parking lot was full by the time I arrived, cars lined neatly along the gravel, familiar faces moving slowly toward the chapel doors, dressed in black, heads bowed, voices hushed with the particular quiet reserved for grief. I sat in my car for a long moment, watching them gather to mourn a version of me that had never actually died, and let myself feel, one last time, the full weight of what my family had been willing to do rather than simply tell the truth. Then I got out, smoothed my dress, and walked toward the doors. Inside, organ music played low and mournful, candles flickering along the aisle, a large photograph of me, taken years ago, at a family barbecue I barely remembered, propped on an easel near the altar, flanked by white lilies. I stood at the back for a moment, unnoticed in the dim light, veiled slightly by the shadow of the doorway and the low hum of quiet conversation filling the room. Nobody expected to see me here. Nobody was looking for a woman who wasn't supposed to exist anymore. My mother stood near the front, composed, elegant in black, accepting condolences with practiced grace, her hand resting lightly on my father's arm, as if steadying him instead of herself. I watched her for a long moment, memorizing the performance, before I started walking down the aisle. The first person to notice was Aunt Carol, seated near the back. Her head turned, her eyes widened, her hand flew to her mouth. She didn't scream. She just went very still, watching me move past her like she was seeing something her mind refused to fully process. Whispers rippled outward from her seat, spreading through the pews like wind moving through tall grass, heads turning one by one until the entire room had shifted its attention toward the aisle, toward me, toward the impossible fact of my footsteps on the chapel floor. The organ music faltered, then stopped entirely, the organist's hands frozen mid-note. My mother turned last of all, drawn by the sudden silence, her composed expression cracking the instant her eyes found mine. I kept walking, my pulse steady, my breath even, the folder of evidence held firmly against my side, until I reached the front of the chapel and stood directly beside the photograph of the version of me they'd chosen to believe in. "I'm not who you think you're mourning," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence of the room. "I'm not dead. I never was." My mother's face drained of all its careful color. "Grace?" My father rose halfway from his seat, his voice breaking on my name. You're here." "I'm alive," I said, turning slowly to face the room, the folder steady in my hands. "I've been alive this whole time. Recovering, healing, exactly where I told my mother I would be. She knew that. She's known that for months." A wave of murmurs rose through the pews, disbelief tangled with dawning horror, as faces turned from me to my mother and back again. "This is a misunderstanding," my mother said quickly, stepping forward, her voice pitched for the room now, performing composure even as her hands trembled at her sides. "There's an explanation for all of this." "There is," I agreed. "It's in this folder. Emails between you and your lawyer, dated 5 months before this obituary ran, discussing how to expedite Grandma's trust using a presumption of death. An insurance policy filed in my name, with a forged signature, 4 months ago. A notary who remembers a woman impersonating me to file it." The room went utterly silent, the kind of silence that has weight, that presses against the walls of a space. "That's not," my mother started, but her voice cracked, the sentence collapsing before it could finish forming. "The business has been failing for almost a year," I continued, quieter now, but the chapel was so still my voice still carried to every corner. "You knew that. You decided a dead daughter was more useful than a struggling one." Aunt Carol stood from her seat, her voice unsteady but clear. "She asked me about insurance paperwork weeks ago. I didn't understand what she meant. I do now." That was the one crowd reaction I let land, the room's collective attention shifting fully away from me and onto my mother, chairs creaking as people turned, the weight of belief finally settling where it belonged. My father stood fully now, his hand no longer resting on my mother's arm, but hanging at his side, distant from her for the first time since I'd walked in. "Is it true?" he asked her, his voice hollow. "All of it?" She didn't answer. Her silence, in front of an entire chapel of witnesses, was answer enough. I did what I had to do, she finally said, quiet now, stripped of performance. I was trying to save this family. You tried to erase me to save yourself, I said. There's a difference. The officiant, who had been standing frozen near the altar through all of it, finally stepped forward, his voice careful. I think, given the circumstances, we should conclude the service here. That was the second reaction I let land, and the only one from him, a quiet acknowledgement that the room had shifted beyond anything the day had been planned for. I didn't chase my mother as she walked out through the side door, her heels sharp against the stone floor, my father following a moment later, his shoulders bowed in a way I hadn't seen before. I let them go. The rest belonged to lawyers now, not to a chapel full of lilies and a photograph that no longer meant what it once had. Emily reached me first, pulling me into a hug fierce enough to knock the breath from me. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I should have asked more questions months ago. You're asking them now, I said. That's what matters. Frank found me near the doors, Patricia the notary standing quietly beside him, her face pale but resolved. I'll tell them everything I remember, she said simply. Whatever's needed. 3 weeks later, the insurance policy was formally flagged for fraud investigation. The trust, restored to its original terms, released to me directly, exactly as my grandmother had intended, protected by language she'd written long before anyone thought to challenge it. My father moved out shortly after, staying with his brother while the business finally, honestly, faced bankruptcy proceedings instead of quiet denial. He calls me now, every week, asking questions instead of avoiding them. My mother and I haven't spoken since the chapel. I don't know if we will again. Some doors, once opened all the way, don't close back into what they used to be. I visited my grandmother's grave the following month, the marble marker still clean and new, and sat there for a long while, my hand resting on the cool stone the way hers used to rest on mine. You knew, I told her quietly. Somehow, you already knew. The wind moved through the cemetery, soft and unhurried, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something loosen fully in my chest, not triumph, exactly, just the quiet relief of a truth finally standing where it belonged, out in the open, with nowhere left to hide. If your family ever tried to write you out of your own story, tell me how you wrote yourself back in. Share your experience below. And for more stories like this, subscribe to Family Betrayal Verdict.